And we're live. Here I am. We're back. Greetings, you bunch of savages. Don't have a lot to say today, but I wanted to cover something that is current events. So this is a good time to talk about it. Economic collapse, right? We think we all know what that means. We probably don't. When was the last time the world had an economic collapse? You'll say, "Oh, 2008." Nah, that was kiddie games. How about the Great Depression? Yeah, maybe. Well, that was pretty close. I was watching but no, maybe it makes the top 5. I was listening. I was watching a video. I was listening to it because I was sleeping, about the Black Plague or the Black Death or the bubonic plague or all these different terms for it. It hit. And no one really knows where it came from, but probably it wasn't a big problem where it came from because species, even humans, were probably somewhat immune or adapted to it or whatever. But it showed up in the Mediterranean, probably through the Silk Road or some similar. And then it spread throughout Europe, and then it got to the UK, England at the time. So this all happened in the mid 1300s. I was reminded last night while I was listening to this that the first real outbreak of note, remember, this is the 1300s, so record keeping wasn't all that great. But the first outbreak of note, meaning someone bothered to write it down, was in like 1348 and lasted to 1350 before it basically burned itself out. Now, my understanding, though, is that this was kind of a recurring thing. Like every 4 or 10 years, another outbreak would happen. But I'm talking about economic collapse. So let's just talk about the first one. The plague hit Europe, and it just sort of burned through the population. And burn is not inappropriate. It was like a fire. Whole villages were emptied because most of the villagers died, and then the people who were left, why ever they survived, it doesn't even matter. They would then they couldn't stay there. There was not enough community left to run a village. Okay, plant the seeds and harvest them and deal with the goats, deal with the sheep and shear the sheep and card the wool. There just wasn't enough people left in the village to operate the village, so people would leave. So all across Europe and England, there are what they call plague villages. I think that's the term, that are just ruins from the 1300s of villages, little small towns that used to exist, but after the 1300s really didn't. People just left, and apparently never found good reason to go back. Or there were so many taboos about that spot, that valley over there where that terrible thing happened, that people didn't want to go back. In any case, between 1348 and 1350, I've heard various numbers, but in this reporting that I listened to last night, it was 40 to 50% of the population died over those 2 years. And the plague recurred several times. The deaths are kind of interesting in a gruesome way. Of course, we didn't have anything like modern medicine back there. This was, Yersinia pestis, which is the source of the plague, is a bacterium. It's easily treated now with antibiotics. Almost nobody dies of bubonic plague anymore. You can still get it, but there's no excuse to die from it. As soon as you show any symptoms, the doctors will jump right on that. And by the way, emergency room clinicians and family care physicians, they learn when they're going through their studies. I'm getting off track. When they go through their studies, they learn the symptoms of like a dozen or so, maybe 20 classic horrendous diseases that they need to know every single symptom of those dozen to 24 diseases, every single symptom. Like they may have weird presentations. They may present differently in women than men. They may present differently in children than in adults. But there's 20 or so diseases. Classic diseases that everybody who gets anywhere close to the healthcare system, even nurse practitioners and doctors' assistants, they learn the symptoms of these diseases. There's no reason for anybody to die from bubonic plague or the Black Death, as they used to call it, Yersinia pestis. No reason. It's completely treatable. But back then, they didn't have any of that. They didn't have a germ theory of disease. So this thing swept through these communities, which you couldn't really do today, and it completely destroyed them. And that's morbidly fascinating. But the real lesson that came out of this, and what they mentioned in the video last night, was that it completely changed the economic landscape. Economics, I'm using this term deliberately. They would not have used that term. I'm using it because of the title of this video. Economics back then was essentially feudalism, where the king owned the country. Kind of like how Donald Trump wants to do. The king owned the country. The country from border to border was his property. He could stay in your castle if you wanted to. He could kick you out of your castle and put someone he liked better in your castle. This is called infeudation. And then there was sub-infeudation. You were the lord of the castle or the manor, and you had lords and people under you, and that you could do to them what the king could do to you. So it just sort of the pissing just sort of trickled down, as piss often does. So, but that was broke. That whole and at the bottom, well, near the bottom were the merchants and the craftsmen. These were people who were ostensibly free. Merchants needed to be free to travel and to set prices and to decide what products to offer. So they enjoyed their freedom. They brought value to the kingdom. And craftsmen needed to be free so they could work on any project that the village needed done, or that the king needed done, or they needed to be done in general. And they were free to take on apprentices and to teach their craft to a new person. They didn't need permission. So there were the merchants and the craftsmen were this lower level of free people. They weren't the lords living in the manors. They certainly weren't the king or any of his circle, but they were right in this kind of middle layer. I guess today we call them the middle class. And then below that were the serfs, which have no real, I'm going to say, representation in modern times. But I mean, who am I kidding? Look around. The serfs belonged to the land. They weren't slaves as such, but they legally belonged to the land. So if there was a new king, you didn't get your freedom. You still belonged to the land. And when the new king showed up and he said, "Oh, these are my serfs," they would all understand what that means. Yeah, I guess we belong to you, because now you're the king and we belong to the land, and this is your land. And so what do you want us to do? So that whole arrangement, that whole trickle down, top down, free at the top, somewhat free in the middle, and absolutely no freedom at the bottom, that was blown up by the Black Death. And the reason was pretty simple. And you wouldn't think about it until someone mentions it. And then you're like, oh, yeah, of course that's what happened. What happened was, with half the people dead, and by the way, a lot of the lords and ladies, they died too, and the clergy and the physicians, so-called, whatever they could do, herbalists mostly, leeches, and then the merchants and the craftsmen, they died too. So there was a lot of death. They made a big deal out of it when the 1400s came around, and they were painting pictures about it and writing poetry and writing music, and they're talking about what just happened to them over the course of about 30 years, starting in 1348. They talked about how indiscriminate the plague was, and it really was quite indiscriminate. If you were really isolated, then maybe you avoided it. But given all the travel in the kingdom and animals, herd animals coming and going, it was pretty much inevitable that it would spread pretty easily. So with the death at all levels of feudalism basically broke down. And the people at the bottom, including the serfs, began to realize, hey, there's nobody watching. Hey, there's not enough of me to go around. I'm a survivor There was 500 serfs in this kingdom working the fields, and now there's only 200 of us. You know, we've got some leverage here. And as soon as they kind of figure that out, that all of a sudden there's a new king and there's a couple of new lords, and now they're trying to get things done. They're trying to bootstrap their economy, and there's fewer serfs, and maybe even the death toll among the serfs was even higher than it was among the higher uh, echelons, possible. And now the serfs are like in high demand, and so they could like, you want me to do something? Oh, I'll, I'm willing to think about it, but you're going to have to make some concessions here, because I've got several different lords who have land that needs planting and harvesting, and their herds need herding, and their sheep need shearing, and all this kind of stuff. So, yeah, I could belong to you, but I could belong to them, and they're offering me actual money and freedom to travel, and freedom to marry, and and you're offering me what? Anything? Nothing? I just your slave, but he's offering me this other stuff, and you can't stop me from leaving because you don't even have troops anymore. So I could just take this opportunity and just skip this village and go work in that other village where he's offering me freedom and money and whatever. And so the serfs broke out from the oppression of feudalism because they had leverage. And if you think about it, it's like, oh yeah, of course. Why not? Why wouldn't they do that? Why wouldn't that be the case? And so the Black Death had this amazing economic impact of really introducing this idea that really had never existed, that, yeah, you probably are free to kind of do whatever you want to do. And you don't really need to have a master, and no one can really lord over you. And if you don't want that in your life, you can go someplace else and pick a different life for yourself. And that was a new idea. And that came about because of the Black Plague. Now, the Black Plague destroyed feudalism. Now, maybe it was already on its last legs, and maybe there were other reasons why feudalism was done, and maybe it would have collapsed on its own anyway. But the Black Plague came along and destroyed feudalism in Europe. It didn't destroy it in Asia, by the way. There were still feudal lords in Japan fighting warlords, fighting wars among themselves until the Americans showed up in their black ships in Tokyo Bay. I mean, I'm probably getting the history wrong here, but it was in like the 1800s that the Americans showed up and decided that Japan needed to join the family of nations and open up their people to commerce. Of course, what's really happening is the United States had goods. They were manufacturing now. They were making ships. They were making cannons and guns and food stuff and everything else, clothing, needles and thread. All this stuff was being manufactured in all these factories in the Midwest, and they wanted to sell it to the Japanese as well as to the English and the Germans and the French and the Portuguese and the Spanish. They wanted to sell it to the Japanese, and the Japanese were a feudal society. They were completely closed down. They didn't want to talk to anybody or have any influences or free any of the serfs or anything. So the Americans went over there. Gunship diplomacy was basically born in the example of Japan. And feudalism died in Asia in the late 1800s, early 1900s. But it died in Europe because of the Black Plague, Black Death, the bubonic plague, which killed half the population of the region. All right. Fast forward 2025, and Donald Trump is playing fast and loose with the apparatus of the global economic system. Who knows what his plans are? It doesn't even matter. For my purposes here, and therefore for your purposes here, all we have to do is recognize a couple of things that are happening. And it's a little bit like the Black Death. Donald Trump and his sycophants, perhaps deliberately, maybe they got a plan, but more likely, I mean, you know how these things are, on accident, are in the process of blowing up the global economy. And where you're sitting and where I'm sitting right here, and what we think about that, blowing up the economy, what does it mean? Tariffs means that there are going to be increases in the price of almost everything in the U.S. So that's a thing. 100 as of this morning or yesterday afternoon, 145% tariffs against anything being imported from China. 145% is almost 150%, 1.5x. So that means a $1,000 smartphone that's imported from China will, without any changes on the Chinese side or the, yeah, will be $2,500. So that's that. They're calling it a trade embargo against China because no one's going to buy what used to be a $1,000 phone for $2,500. It's just not going to do that. And okay, there you go. I guess that's it. So that's what's going to happen. And maybe he'll back down and maybe he'll make it a different number. Maybe the number will be smaller. Maybe the number will be bigger, right? Because if he really is trying to shut down China, well, that's how you do it. You just shut them down. And then they don't sell us anything. It's like an embargo. They don't sell us anything. We don't buy anything from them, which is not quite the same thing. We don't buy anything from them. And then as a consequence, they don't sell anything to us. That's the order of operations. And then we're not giving them money. And so where's their money coming from? Well, they'll try to sell phones to India, and maybe they'll get away with that. And maybe they'll sell some iPhones to India, but they're not going to sell them in the US because they just went up from $1,000 to $2,500. And people are saying that this is going to blow up the global economy because not only is it finished products that come out of China or finished products that come out of Taiwan eventually, it's all of the materials, components, and even raw materials like aluminum and iron that come out of China. So there's a lot of even things that are manufactured in the United States are probably actually assembled in the United States. So I bought some solar panels, and I deliberately was looking at the time. I was looking for a company that where the solar panels were made in the USA. And the practical matter was I was hoping to find a company that I could interact with directly if I had any problems with the solar panels or if I wanted more. They quickly went out of business, so it didn't do me any good. But I was looking for, made in the USA and trying to do the right thing for US manufacturers at the time. That was 15 years ago. And but even at the time I knew they were not making the little solar wafers. I mean, the solar panel is a aluminum rim, like a picture frame, an aluminum frame with a white plastic base on which are glued all these solar panels, all these solar cells are individual cells. And then the cells are taped together with aluminum and lead so that they can conduct. And then there's a box on the back that where all the traces come in from all the individual cells, and they come in and they're brought together. And then there's one wire that goes on, the two wires that go out, a plus and a minus DC. So I say all this. Oh, and that box on the back has some chips in it for balancing and optimizing the power output of all these individual cells that are on the panel. The panel has individual cells tied together. Okay, nothing in there. Probably not one single thing is made in the USA. Nothing. Not even the wire, not even the aluminum traces and the lead traces, not even the solder that they solder all this together with, not the plastic, not the aluminum frame, probably not even the sticker that they put on it, the little sticker that they put on the back that says made in the USA, not even the sticker that says made in the USA is made in the USA. The panels, though, are assembled, could be assembled in the USA. And maybe they get the individual cells and they tape them together, or maybe they get the whole panel, but they add the wire to the back. Maybe they get the panel without the aluminum frame on it, and so they cut the frame and they attach it, and then they put the wires on the back, and then they put it up and they say made in America. It's assembled in America. No single part of it, not to the tiniest screw, is made in America. You just know that. I just know. Nothing, you don't do anything in America. Everything is done in China or some combination of China, Taiwan, South Korea, Vietnam, Philippines. Wife is back. And so when you start throwing tariffs around, you run the risk of blowing up the global economy. Now, the point of this video is to say that that is a thing that can happen, just like it happened with the Black Death in 1300s. You can have an event that blows up the economy and changes everything. No one intended to destroy feudalism in Europe, but feudalism in Europe was destroyed. Donald Trump has his tariff plan. Who knows what he's going to do, and who knows what will be done after he's no longer in office 20 years from now about the economics. But there's a risk that the changes he's putting in place will be like the Black Death, that this will so disrupt things that the global economy will be destroyed, like feudalism was destroyed by the Black Death. The global economy could be destroyed. Here's a data point for you. The price of crude oil is falling through the floor. The price of crude oil is falling through the floor. Now, that's not because of some 4D chess move by Donald Trump to wrangle lower prices out of the Saudis. It's because there's this lack of demand. They've been pumping oil over here, and they've been putting it in ships, and they've been sailing the ships, and they can't unload the ships because the refineries are full of oil because they haven't been able to refine it into finished products that can also ship out. There's just all this backup in the system. And so the oil is sitting at the terminals where it's being pumped out to in Saudi Arabia and Russia and every place else, and it can't get on a ship. But they have to keep selling it, so they keep lowering the price, hoping that someone will buy it on a discount because the demand for crude oil has slacked off. Why is that? It's not because Donald Trump promised to lower prices. It's because he's blown a tariff-sized hole in the global economy. And the capacity to burn crude oil, to build things and ship things and warehouse things and put made in America stickers on things, all of that capacity is kind of sitting idle. No one knows what to buy, at what price they should be buying it. No one knows when they should ship something. So demand for new products has gone down because there's inventory that's sitting in the warehouse. Consumers are looking at the price of things. Everything's really expensive. They're hoping that Donald Trump keeps saying he's going to bring prices down. So people are holding back on purchases, hoping that, the price will come down. So I'll just wait. He keeps saying that. He keeps saying that tariffs are going to lower prices. So I guess I'll wait. So people are waiting. They're not buying a lot of stuff. And stuff is accumulating, and there's stuff everywhere. There's stuff on ships, and there's stuff in warehouses, and there's stuff sitting at the factories. Nowhere to go because the demand has fallen through the floor. And the same thing applies to crude oil. Crude oil is sitting on the docks all around the world trying to find a ship to take it someplace where someone will actually put it to use. And as a result of all of this unanticipated consequences, the amount of consumption of crude oil is probably dropping. The price is dropping, so you think that would send the utilization up. You say, ooh, cheaper gasoline. I think I'll get in my car and go for a ride somewhere, a road trip to Las Vegas. Well, you're not going to do that road trip to Las Vegas, not because the gas is expensive. Maybe the gas is kind of cheap right now, or the price is going down. You're not going to think about going to Las Vegas because you don't have money to go to Las Vegas. You just lost your job, or you might be losing your job, or your whole entire industry is on the cutting block, and the federal government is being shut down, and you don't even know if you're going to have a job in the future, and who knows what else is going to get turned upside down. So you're holding on to your money, and you're not going to go to Las Vegas because that's going to cost you money, a room and meals and gambling and whatever else, shows. And so you're not going to make that road trip, and you're not going to get in your car, and you're not going to drive to Las Vegas. And Las Vegas is probably underutilized. And so that's a consumer pattern that has possibly dropped off. Also, there have been continuous rumors in the last 2 months in places like Walmart and Target and some of the others that the consumer, the buyers, the shoppers. So this is the end of the supply chain, the final buyer, you, me, restaurateurs, right, truck drivers. That they're gone. People aren't in the Walmarts. They're not browsing up and down the aisles. Maybe they need 2 or 3 things, and they go in there and they come out with their 2 or 3 things, and they go home. Same with Target, same with all the others. And they say that the retail shoppers are gone. They're not showing up. And I keep seeing complaint videos. We all see them. You go on YouTube, you can look them up. People say, here's my shopping cart. I've got probably 2 bags of things in this shopping cart that I'm just about to check out. And this is $200. I've got $200 in like 2, maybe 2.5 bags of groceries in the shopping cart. The shopping cart is not full and overflowing, right? It's just got some things in the bottom, and like 2, 3 bags of groceries. And this is going to be $200. And people are not spending money. They're not spending money, and they're not traveling, and they're not vacationing. There's so much uncertainty in the system right now that they're not spending the money. And another thing they're not spending money on, whether they know it or not, is crude oil. Now, crude oil is kind of special because crude oil is pretty much the only fossil fuel that we use for transportation. And transportation isn't just you in your car going to Starbucks. It's also a big 18-wheeler coming to Starbucks every night at 2 o'clock in the morning to unload all the stuff they use every day, right? The paper cups and the coffee beans and all the Starbucks goodies, all the cookies and shit that they'll sell you. That 18-wheeler shows up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, unloads all the stuff into Starbucks and leaves. And that 18-wheeler runs on crude oil, diesel, of course, but crude oil. And then when you drive to Starbucks and you're in the drive-through lane and you're ordering your latte, you're there in a car running on gasoline or diesel. Even if you're an electric car, you had to charge it with electricity. And where did that come from? If you're in California, probably from a natural gas-fired power plant. So unless you've got your own solar and your own storage batteries and your own everything else, then yeah, you're consuming natural gas by proxy, or even coal. In some places, many places in the US, you're consuming coal by proxy when you have an electric car. That's just physics, folks. That's not me being mean to people that own electric cars. It's physics. It's the truth. And even if you can convince yourself that you're using nuclear or solar or wind or something, where did those things come from? Sorry, the reality is, and anybody who's even a tiny bit fair will tell you, you can't make solar panels without fossil fuel consumption. You can't make the aluminum that goes into the frame without, smelting bauxite into aluminum and then shaping it. And all this stuff takes energy of some kind. And maybe some of it's electric, and maybe most of it is coal and natural gas. And you can't make windmills for wind farms without huge inputs of fossil fuels for all the materials. It's made out of fiberglass. Where's the glass fiber come from? Where do the resins come from? This is all chemistry. The resins come from fossil fuels. We don't get resins from trees and bark and shit. That all comes from fossil fuels. So you can't make the blades on a wind turbine without crude oil. And then, of course, it generates electricity from the wind. That's nice, but you can't have that thing. You can't have it to start with. The inception of it is impossible without fossil fuels. As the consumer begins to ratchet down their spending because of inflation, can't afford it, because of uncertainty, don't know which way to jump, because of fear of, say, they're about to lose their job, and then that $2,500 they spent to go to Las Vegas is going to seem really stupid, right? I'm about to lose my job. I really would love to go to Las Vegas and watch a show, but that's going to cost me $2,000, including the plane trip, and that's going to seem really dumb if 6 weeks from now I lose my job? So with all this uncertainty, people are stopped consuming fossil fuels. Now, I have been very much on message on this channel when I talk that we have one problem. We have one problem. And I don't care how many problems you think you have. You also have one problem. I'll give you a second to think about that. What is your one problem? Think about that a second. You have one problem, and that's global heating. It resides entirely 100% in physics. It doesn't go away. It only gets worse. It affects everybody. It affects you and me and all the birdies and all the squirrels and the rabbits and the bunnies and everything else. Okay. It affects everybody, everywhere, all the time, essentially forever. Hundreds of thousands of years from now. They, wherever they are, if they even exist, whoever they are, will be dealing with this 100,000 years from now. You have one problem. You think you have lots of problems. You have one problem. All your other problems are essentially inconveniences. Global heating is going to destroy everything. Global heating is our Black Death. Global heating is the problem that when it sweeps through will be completely foreign and alien. People will have no idea what hit them. Just as the physicians in the 1300s did not have a germ theory of disease, we do not have the equivalent of a germ theory of disease regarding global heating. It's just going to hit us out of the blue. Even though we have science, and even though we have climate science, and even though we have all these science communicators, and even though we have all this legislation, and we have the COPs, and we have the IPCC, and we have the Paris Climate Accords, and we have all this stuff, most people, just about everybody, has no idea what's coming. No clue. Not the first clue. In the 1300s, some ship showed up in some Mediterranean port, and you can look it up. There's stories about this. I don't know how true they are. Look it up. They're interesting. A ship shows up in Venice or someplace, and the crew is almost entirely dead. And there's one person on board who's still half alive and can still talk. And they say, yeah, something hit us. We were healthy when we left port, and we're all dead now. And then he dies. And, they try and quarantine the ship. And they try and do all these things. They know there's a problem. Something terrible has happened. They don't know what it is, but they know it's terrible because they believe these men, and now they're all dead. And they try and quarantine the ship, and they push the ship out into the sea, and they anchor it out there. And what they don't know is the rats are jumping off, and they're swimming ashore, and the rats are bringing the Black Plague. They had no idea. We didn't know any of this stuff until later. Much, much later, we learned how they died. It's going to be the same thing with global heating. The equivalent of it shows up suddenly, people are dead, they tell us how they died, and then they die, and we get these scattered stories, and we don't know what's happening, and we try and isolate it, and we try and put it someplace else out of the way and out of the sight and out of mind, and then the equivalent of rats come ashore. You can't get away from this thing. Global heating is going to be everywhere. Some places worse than others, but everywhere. The Black Death, when it went through Europe, killed half the people, didn't kill them all. Some places worse than others, but it doesn't matter. That's what happened. And global heating is coming for us, and it's going to kill half of us. Some places worse than others. Nobody will understand what just hit them. They don't know what they're supposed to do. They have no theory. There's no idea what happened. It's strange. It's demons. It's the devil. It's a miracle. It's a terrible thing. It's the Antichrist. They'll have all kinds of stories they tell each other, just like they did in 1348. Just like they did in 1348. They're going to tell stories about what happened. But it's global heating, and it's physics, and it's caused by the greenhouse effect, which we're causing with fossil fuel consumption. So I've been on this channel saying this for years. I say it all the time. It's the only thing that matters. It's the only problem you've really got. Everything else is an inconvenience in comparison. Even if you lost your job, trust me, that's an inconvenience in comparison to all this other shit that's coming. But Donald Trump and his, are they geniuses? Are they morons? I don't know. You tell me. doing their tariff thing, and they're going to tariff everybody, and they're going to tear up the global economy, and they're going to sink the countries they don't like, and they're going to make all this money in tariff taxes, and they're going to keep it, and they're going to give it to their buddies at the top of the food chain, and they're going to do whatever they do with it. They're going to buy yachts and villas and whole countries. Who knows what they're going to do? But they're going to blow up the global economy, and that is going to change everything. The Black Death destroyed feudalism, and created a notion of freedom for people, the serfs, who had never had leverage to claim freedom. And when half of them were dead, they then went to the king and said, yeah, we'll work for you, but you're going to have to take care of us, because now we're all you got. All right. Everybody we knew is dead, but I'm not. And so I'm your only serf, pal. They don't even have to bend the knee when they're in front of the king. Yeah, I'm here. You want something? What do you want? You're going to pay me? Because I got another guy across the border, across the mountain range, who's going to pay me a lot. So we are in that same situation. Global heating is going to come. It's already here. It's going to destroy everything. And some of the people are going to find themselves, blinking in this new day, this new dawn. And what's going to be left? I don't know. What are they going to have to work with? Beats me. I guess we'll find out, because we're going to find out. And if Donald Trump wants to blow up the global economy, well, how do I feel about that? How do I really feel about that? I mean, I may think he's a moron. I may think he's insane. Lots of people think he's crazy. He doesn't know what he's doing. But hold on a second. All that aside, how do I feel about that? If I was a serf in the Middle Ages and the rats were swimming ashore from this plague ship, I can say, oh, that's terrible. We're going to have a plague. Half the people are going to die. And then I can say, wait a second. How do I really feel about that? If I can survive this plague, then I've got leverage with the king, because I'll be the only serf left who can do anything for that asshole. And he's going to have to give me shit. I'll go someplace else and work for somebody else. He's going to have to give me freedom and agency, and he's going to have to give me education and teach me how to read and write. And I want some things. I want the Magna Carta. I want some bullshit going on here, okay? Screw this feudalism stuff. And so as the rats are jumping off the plague ship and they're swimming ashore, and you have a germ theory of disease, and you kind of know what this is heading, you may be thinking, hold on. Black Death. That sounds bad, but I don't know. How do I really feel about that? That's going to destroy feudalism. See, that's going to destroy feudalism, isn't it? I'm a serf, but I'm going to have some leverage. So I guess the rat's coming ashore. How do I feel about that? How do I feel about that? I want to emerge from this a free man. Yeah. The rats are coming ashore from the plague ship, and I'm, after 2 years of this bullshit, I'm going to be a free man. I'm not going to be a serf anymore. Oh, how do I feel about that? So Donald Trump is destroying the global economy. Crude oil prices are plunging. Everyone's going to say, yay! Okay, that ain't what you think. Crude oil prices are plunging. An iPhone that cost you $1,000 is going to cost you $2,500. Not to mention all the 4.5 billion other things that we buy from China and Asia. They're all going to go up to some extent. And more importantly, all of this friction and all the sand being thrown in the gears of commerce, because free trade has been the rule for the most part. So without free trade, how about if they just blow up the global economy? Okay, that's bad. That's not a good thing, because I'm part of the global economy, right? But hold on. If they blow up the global economy, that's going to reduce fossil fuel consumption, right? People aren't going to drive. They're not going to fly. There's not going to be any goods moving around, right? No shipping, no cargo ships, no trains, no planes, no FedEx, right? No transportation of goods, because who's going to buy a $2,500 iPhone from China? You may as well leave it in China. So that ship doesn't have to sail, at least not for iPhones. So, yeah. So he's going to blow up the global economy. Hold on. How am I supposed to feel about that? Because I got one problem, folks, and that's global heating, which is caused by consumption of fossil fuels, which is really made necessary is the word, necessary by the global economy, including your nuclear power plants and your wind farms and your solar panels and your batteries and your everything. It's all made possible with with fossil fuels. All of it, 100% of it, 100%, all of it is made possible with fossil fuels. Manufacturing, raw materials, assembly, transportation, all of it. The internet on which you buy your Amazon Prime, that's all maintained with fossil fuels. So you destroy the global economy. Am I making my point? This is an interesting point. I think we have to all think about this. If we destroy the global economy, or at least put a bullet in its head, right? If we destroy the global economy and we reduce consumer activity to a fraction, and we destroy entire industries, maybe there's not enough people willing to fly on the airlines that the aviation industry goes bankrupt. That would be interesting, wouldn't it? Wouldn't that reduce fossil fuel consumption to some extent? And a lot of the crude oil gets consumed in transportation, including people. So, yeah. So when people stop moving around, we stop burning crude oil. Now we might still continue to burn natural gas because we use a lot of that to make electricity, to generate electricity. We burn it to boil the water, to create the steam, to turn the turbine to make the electricity. Okay, fossil fuels. We might still continue to burn coal because we use coal to do exactly the same thing in some places. Burn the coal, boil the water, create the steam, drive the turbine, create the electricity. So for electricity purposes, we may continue to burn natural gas and coal, and we'll have some nuclear, and we'll have some solar and some wind. Okay, we kind of have as much of that maybe as we're going to get. But that's just electricity, which is just 20% of our energy consumption. The other 80% is fossil fuels used for mostly transportation, but also generating, electricity and smelting metals and all these, creating cement, to make concrete and some other things. So the crude oil part of this might actually fall off a cliff. The price of crude oil may go to $20 a barrel. The price of gasoline might go to $1 a gallon. I don't think so. I think they're going to make sure that you pay at the pump, which you're accustomed to paying at the pump. God damn it! And then if they do sell anything at the pump, they're going to reap the harvest of the profit. Right? They're going to keep that stuff. But how else are they supposed to stay in business? They can't stay in business if they can't make a profit. But it's going to be harder to make a profit when people aren't traveling and goods aren't traveling and warehouses and 18-wheelers and deliveries of coffee to Starbucks all over the country and all over the world every single night at 2:00 in the morning, right? People aren't consuming. These things don't happen. And then we reduce our fossil fuel emissions, carbon dioxide primarily. We can accidentally reduce our carbon dioxide emissions. Now, that doesn't save us from global heating. There's a certain amount that's in the atmosphere of CO2 and methane and other things right now. The CO2 component doesn't go away, not quickly. It goes away over geological time. So it goes away over hundreds of thousands, who knows, maybe millions of years. So the CO2 levels stay pretty constant if there are no additional inputs of CO2 into the atmosphere from burning fossil fuels. So if we reduce our fossil fuel consumption, then the amount of increase in the CO2 levels starts to level out. And then instead of going up like a rocket, it's just going up like a line. It's a constant increase. Maybe if it really plateaus, there can even be a slight decrease in CO2 levels in the atmosphere over time, like thousands of years. That doesn't save us from global heating because there's already 420 some odd parts per million in the atmosphere, and that ain't going anywhere. And that has already created record problems and record storms and record ocean heat waves and record land heat waves and record ice melt and record low sea ice extent and record rainstorms. And we run out of superlatives at some point. We need to invent more words for record because it just doesn't carry the punch that it really needs to carry. The people in the U.S. Southeast have had one record after the other broken like every week. Every week they break the records from the week before. It's insane. So we've already done enough damage that even if we stopped right here, Trade war was absolutely annihilated the global economy. Consumers are so terrified or so poor or so out of work or so whatever that they can't participate anymore. And they're not traveling to Las Vegas, and they're not traveling to Minnesota over the holidays, and they're not sending their kid to college, and they're not buying new shoes every 3 months. They're keeping them, and they darn their socks, and they sew buttons back on their clothes, and they grow food in their backyard, and they're just not participating anymore because they're broke, they're terrified, their neighbors lost their house because they couldn't pay the mortgage. I mean, people are just, because they lost a job, people are they're just going to hunker down. They're going to be scared, and they just stop spending money, as we are seeing, as the retailers like Walmart and Target and the others will tell you. The buyers are gone. They're gone, and they say that because they have to say that. That's their quarterly report. They have to tell their shareholders what's going on. There's a legal responsibility to do that. And if purchases are down and profits are down and volumes are down, then they're down, and they have to say that. And so they do. Where are the buyers? We don't know where the buyers are. The buyers are gone. And, well, your guess is as good as anybody else's where the buyers went. You're one of those buyers. Where did you go? Why did you stop? So maybe we blow up the global economy. Maybe that's a bad thing. Maybe that's terrible. Maybe iPhones that used to cost $1,000 now cost $2,500. And wow, okay, that's annoying. That's a fact. But what if doing this is the only way we can stop burning crude oil? What if blowing up the global economy is the only way we have discovered on accident to stop to do the thing we were supposed to do under the Paris Climate Accords, which is cut down on our fossil fuel consumption? Well, they called it cut down on our carbon dioxide emissions, but that's just a euphemism because they don't want to ever they don't want to ever utter the words in this particular order of sentence structure: stop burning fossil fuels. They don't ever want to say that. They don't ever want to say stop burning fossil fuels, because anybody in governance or science or education or science communication, they know what that means. Stop burning fossil fuels means the end of the modern world. Even if you were to allow the burning of fossil fuels like natural gas for creating electricity, even if you just allowed for that, so we could have lighting and refrigeration and air conditioning and electric cars, even if you just allow the burning of natural gas for electricity, ending crude oil extraction and combustion for transportation and all the heavy manufacturing that uses that, and leaving coal in the ground, and just having the electricity we might get from natural gas plus the other things, would completely destroy the global economy. You almost wouldn't have a use for electricity after we destroyed the global economy. Your necessity for cooking implies you have food. Where'd that come from? Your electricity uses to charge your electric car implies you have somewhere to go and some reason to do that, but you probably don't. You don't have a job. That place went away. That building has been shuttered. That business went bankrupt, and your industry, they're not hiring people. They're laying people off. And maybe you can find some other employer that hasn't gone bankrupt, but they're not going to hire you, and they're probably going to lay off some of their employees besides. So you won't even need electricity as much as you do now, because your life is going to contract. And we could not have done this deliberately. There's no way humans were going to do any of the things called for in the Paris Climate Accords. Now, what was it? At one time, we're going to reduce carbon emissions, however you're going to do that. We're going to reduce carbon emissions by 7% every year for like 9 years to get to 50% reduction or something like that. Of course, it never happened. Fossil fuel consumption and, of course, carbon emissions have continued and have increased, and the increase has increased. And so it's never been higher. So we didn't do any of those things. But that's because We would never voluntarily and deliberately curtail our consumption of crude oil and other fossil fuels in order to reduce carbon emissions. We would never do that. We did not do that. Proof that we would never do that. And we cannot do that because if we were to reduce consumption of fossil fuels, it would blow the global economic system to rat shit. But the inverse also works. It's true. We didn't voluntarily and deliberately reduce fossil fuel consumption by 7% per year for 9 years, as called for in the Paris Climate Accords. But look what we did do. The year 2025 rolled around, and this and that, and we blew up the global economy anyway. Not deliberately, not because we thought it was necessary to save us from global heating, but we blew it up on accident. Because what? Egos? Greed? Machiavellian machinations? I don't even know. The historians will look back and they'll untangle all this and they'll tell us what happened. But anyway, it's happening. So the Black Death has come. The global economy is being blown to rat shit. Well, that's a bad thing. Oh no, I'm panicking. Wait, hold on. No, hold on. How do I feel about that? The global economy is being imploded. I mean, it sounds bad, but hold on. I have one problem, and that's global heating. My problem is the constant increase in CO2 levels in the atmosphere caused by constant consumption of fossil fuels constantly every day, all the time, for everybody, all the time. That's my problem. And they're blowing up the global economy. And the price of oil is cratering because there's less demand. And the retailers are saying that there's no buyers. Well, that's a problem of some sort. But on the other hand, for my actual problem, this isn't a bad thing. We may actually, through this bullshit, be able to reduce our consumption of fossil fuels. Now, the Paris Climate Accord called for a 7% reduction annually for 9 years to get us to 50% reduction. Can we do 7% reduction for 9 years? Well, I don't know. Let's just say that we do, 7% for a few years. 7% for a few years will probably be enough to blow a gigantic hole right through the global economy and curtail our ability to extract fossil fuels, find markets for them, refine them into useful products, and slowly, because we've just blown a hole through the global economy, slowly make it impossible to do the other things, like build iPhones for a price that people can afford and transport them in a way that people can afford. And so by having a few years or even maybe possibly just 6 months of this sort of Black Death in the global economy caused by this tariff war, if we could get 6 months of Black Death, or maybe a year of the plague caused by all this disruption, maybe the economy that emerges from that solves our problem. The actual Black Death in Europe destroyed feudalism and solved the problem of the serfs being slaves. They became freed men who could demand a wage, demand perks, demand freedom, could marry who they wanted to, and travel as they wanted. The Black Death destroyed feudalism and freed the serfs. What if imploding the global economy blows a hole in the oil-based consumption patterns that we have become a slave to and frees us, I'm trying to use the right words here, frees us from our dependency on fossil fuels so we can do other things, learn how to live a different way. Okay, maybe you have to grow some of your own food. Maybe you have to work with your neighbors and you combine your properties and you grow food for each other. And maybe there's another family that has children and they need daycare. And so you take care of the kids, you put them in the garden, you all work in the garden, and someone has a job and someone's bringing in income, and pretty soon you form a little village. And you've got the elders and you've got the tinies and you've got the teenagers, and everybody brings a different set of skills, and everyone's pulling together. Some people are cooking meals, and some people are preserving food, and some people are finding resources and bringing them in. And some people have money and they're going out and trying to buy things that the group needs, and they come back with this stuff. And you're kind of recreating village life. You wouldn't have done that if somebody, you know, whose initials are DJT, if somebody didn't come along and blow up the global economy. You wouldn't have done any of those things. But here we are. Here we are, you know, uh, April 10th, some 5 or 6 days after Liberation Day, as he called it, where he applied 10 to 50% tariffs on basically the entire planet. And we've got a tariff-sized hole blown through the global economy. I don't call that a problem. I call that an opportunity. And the opportunity is, of course, like that serf who found himself alone in his village, everybody dead, maybe his whole family dead, but he's alive. And then when the king comes down and says, you get out there and plant some wheat and get ready to harvest, you're that serf. And you're thinking, well, yeah, I can work for you, but I'm looking around here and there's only a few of us left, and we've been talking among ourselves, Your Majesty. And we think maybe things should be done a little different. So I'm talking to you. I'm that guy. I'm that serf. I'm that guy who just watched all the rats jumping off the plague ship and coming ashore, and it's going to destroy half the economy. And I'm thinking to myself, I think I can work this. I think this might have a silver lining. And what I'm telling you is, yes, the global economy will probably be exploded. The global economy will be blown to rat shit. And your iPhone will cost $2,500. And woe is me, and all these things. And you won't drive to Las Vegas on a road trip and have a great fun at $2,500 a night. All right. Suck it up, Buttercup. You have an opportunity here. It's probably forced upon you, and it's going to be painful, and you're going to wish it was otherwise. And, boo-hoo. Nevertheless, you have an opportunity here. You could start thinking about how you're going to survive without fossil fuels, without the global economy and the container ships and the iPhones and the Teslas and maybe even without the electricity and without the Home Depot and without the Target and without the Walmart. And, all these things could blow themselves to pieces over tariffs and lack of buyers in the markets and lack of transportation. And so Trump and his cronies, they'll enrich themselves for a little while, and then they'll kill the goose that laid the golden egg. They'll kill the global economy. And maybe they'll make $100 billion, or they'll make $500 billion, and they'll, of course, keep that for themselves. But what they did, and is this a problem? I'm not sure this is a problem. Hold on. They're blowing up the global economy. Are they saving us? Hold on. Wait. Poof. Brain just exploded. Are they saving us from global heating? Well, no, they're not. They can't do that because that's physics. Can they save us from global heating getting worse? Maybe. Maybe this is not a bad thing. Blow up the global economy. Cut down on fossil fuel consumption. Crater the global economy. Crater fossil fuel consumption. Destroy the Walmarts. Destroy the Targets. Destroy the Amazon Prime. Destroy the cargo ships coming in with $1,000 iPhones. Just blow it all up. Destroy everything. World war, nuclear exchange, blow it all up. Just literal craters where factories used to be. Craters. Blow it up. What happens then? Well, you're going to have to live without fossil fuels. And as I have said on you many times, you really have two choices. You can wait for the day when the fossil fuels get shut off. And I've often said, I don't know how they're going to do that or who's going to do it. I'm feeling a little more confident that I know how that's going to happen, and even a little bit confident about when it's going to happen. So now we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. All right. So now we don't have to worry about how they're going to do it or when they're going to do it. They're doing it now, and it's going to happen soon. So we can move on past that. Now, you can wait until they do that. You can wait and then figure your life out. Or you can kind of practice. You can practice living without fossil fuels. So what does that mean? You stop driving. No, maybe you have to drive yourself to work and this and that and the other thing. Well, maybe you need to live closer to work. Maybe you need to work closer to home. Maybe you need to use mass transit. Maybe you need to ride a bicycle. Oh, mass transit runs on fossil fuels. Yeah, but they're not your fossil fuels. They're our fossil fuels. So I will allow in this interim period, in this adjustment zone that we're in, that you can use our fossil fuels, mass transit, okay, and the bus, the train to get to your job. Better still, you have a bicycle. I have a great electric bicycle. My wife has an electric trike, an adult trike. All right. And we just go down the road in those things. They're amazing, absolutely amazing. And you could get an electric bike. You see them all over town now, all over the place, electric bicycles. Almost every intersection you pull up to on your electric bike, there's someone on one of the other directions sitting in the same intersection with you on an electric bike. Get an electric bike, figure out how to do it without fossil fuels. And the reason why you do it now as practice without fossil fuels is because that bike that maybe you would spend $1,000 for now that comes from China either won't come from China, that's the thing, or when it shows up, it's $2,500, just like the iPhone because of tariffs. So it either never shows up, or there's so few that people are actually bidding up the price, right? It's a seller's market. Or when they do show up, the tariffs have jacked up the price already. And maybe $1,000 electric bike, or you can get them that cheap. A good one will be $1,500. $1,000 electric bike could end up costing $4,000 when you can find it. And you have to wait in line, and you have to sign up to be notified when yours shows up. And it could be tough at that point. So you could start practicing now. You could start saying, well, they're about to blow up the global economy. No one's burning fossil fuels. They're going to destroy imports. They're going to destroy imports of everything. And, the gasoline is going to be the first thing to fail because, they're going to stop. They're going to stop shipping crude oil everywhere, and they're going to start hoarding gasoline, and it's just going to dry up and blow away, which is what happens in my book. So I've given some thought to this. And you can start practicing right now. Right now, when you don't have to do it. You don't have to do it. You do it deliberately as a project. And you tell yourself, all right, I don't have fossil fuels. What does that mean? Well, probably the food was not delivered to the supermarket down the street. Some of the shelves are empty. Maybe even most of the shelves are empty. And you don't want to have to drive to Costco, which is 5 miles away. You want to walk to your local market. Well, where is your local market? You probably don't even know. So you have to look it up on Google Maps and find your local markets. There's a liquor store over here. There's a Whole Foods over there. And there's Trader Joe's this way. And there's another small market that way. And there's a Mexican market the other direction. So I'm going to go shop in the Mexican market, see what they have, see what the prices are like. I'll go to the dollar store. I'll go to the someplace else. Hey, I'll go to the Sacred Heart food giveaway. It's 5 days a week. I'll just go there and see what's up with that. I'll just see what they got available. And if they have something I can use, I'll take it. I'll go to the farmer's market. You start experimenting with how you can survive without fossil fuels and how you can get access to food that isn't really shipped in a container from Mexico or someplace like that. And you should be growing your own food, and you should be helping your neighbors do that. You can start practicing this ahead of the actual collapse. And when does the collapse come? Well, given the shape of things right now, it could come next week. Not kidding. Not a joke. This shit is more brittle and fragile than anybody knew. I don't think anybody knew this was going to happen on the scale it's happening. No one believed Trump when he said he was going to tariff everything. They were like, that's moronic. That's insane. He can't do that. Moving on, let's go watch the news and see what's happening with sports. Okay. And then he gets elected, and first 70 days, he's applying tariffs. He's breaking the global system. He's got people so strung out that they're not even showing up in the stores. The things are so expensive they can't even buy them. And they don't want to spend the money. They want to keep their money because they may be out of a job soon. And so they're not spending the money, and they're keeping their money, and they're buying the least amount that they can, and they're buying cheap if they can, and they're foregoing discretionary expenses like travel and vacations and buying fancy things. And yeah, so that will implode the system. That puts us in a recession, and then it puts us in a depression. And depression is a death spiral. And there you go. And then you're 1931, and the economy has gone in the shitter, and no one knows what to do. And soup lines, and soup kitchens, and victory gardens. That's where you are. Well, okay, here we go. We needed to do this anyway, folks. We needed to get off of fossil fuels. Why? Because we got one problem: global heating. And the only way to stop the planet from getting so hot that it kills us, we have to stop burning fossil fuels. So we have to do that. We do it now, we do it a year from now, we do it 5 years from now. It doesn't matter. Whenever it happens, it's going to be too soon for you. You're not going to be ready. So you have to think about right now. While I have fossil fuels, while I can still get an electric bike from China, while my electric bike isn't going to cost me $6,000 and have to wait in line for 4 hours to pick it up, while I can still do something now, I'm going to do it now. And I'm going to start practicing living without fossil fuels. Because eventually, that's what has to happen. And so far, humans have chosen not to do it. Despite our commitments in the Paris Climate Accords, we did not do any of that. Not the first part of it, not the least part of it. We did choose to elect Donald Trump. We did choose to go with a retaliatory tariff plan. We did choose to have a global trade war. We did choose to allow war in Ukraine. We did choose to allow the Gaza thing, and then the bombing of Iran. And we chose all these things. And these are all the things that are happening now. We chose all these things. And together, they're all conspiring now to blow a big hole through the global economy. We did not choose to stop burning fossil fuels. We chose all this other bullshit. Now, because we blow a hole in the global economy, we're going to have to stop burning fossil fuels. We did choose to blow up the global economy. Let's just fess up to that. Let's just confess that we chose that. That was the plan. Before the November elections in the US, that was the stated objective. It was in the Project 2025 plans. Blow up the global economy. Well, not in so many words, right? But tariff this and tax that and cut taxes for the wealthy and increase taxes on this other stuff and tariff the other thing and blow up the global economy as a result. I mean, that's welcome to the land of unintended consequences, but here we are. And so now we're stopping burning fossil fuels. And you can get a barrel of fossil fuels for a song, essentially. You can get a barrel of crude oil now for probably $50 if you look around. And you think, ooh, that's good. No, that's not good. That's the sound of the global economy imploding. So start figuring out how you're going to live without fossil fuels, because that day is now not too far off. What, 6 months? End of this summer, sometime next winter? Yeah, if this whole thing implodes as badly as it could and as violently as it could, yeah, a few months, 6 months, you may find yourself, looking at gas pumps where there's no gas in the underground tank because demand has fallen off a cliff. They just closed up. And maybe you still have a use for fossil fuels, but no one else does. And so when you go to get your diesel or your gasoline, the price is right there on the pump, $6 a gallon, and it's turned off. There's no one inside to take your money. There's no credit card processing. There's nothing. The place is boarded up and they're done. They're out of business, at least until the global economy returns. And that could be your future. So you need to start practicing. How else can I say it? And we are in the equivalent position right now of being that guy in Venice on the dock as the plague ship has been pushed away from the dock and anchored. And the people on shore are trying to figure out what to do with this plague ship. Should we just set it on fire where it is? Should we unload the cargo and then set it on fire? Do we push it further out to sea? And you're sitting there on the dock and you're watching all these rats swimming ashore from the ship. You're going, well, that's not going to work. That's the moment we're at right now. The rats are swimming ashore, bringing the plague with them. And there's no escaping this. The global economic system is going to blow up one way or the other. And, okay, that's bad, or maybe not. So I'm not looking forward to it, and you're not looking forward to it. But when I stop and I'm honest with myself, it's like, well, they're telling us we need to take our medicine. They're telling us it's going to be short term. Uh, you know, uh, uh, what was the euphemism they used in the news? Um, I can't remember, like discomfort or something, right? Short term discomfort. That's putting it mildly. There's going to be a short term dumpster fire, basically, and then people are going to find out how bad that can get, and then they're really going to panic, and they're going to stop buying everything and stop traveling and stop doing anything. They might even stop paying the mortgage on their house and stop paying their utility bill. People are just going to panic. They're just going to say, "Oh, whatever. They've betrayed me. Now I'm betraying them," and that's it. That's the beginning of the end. That's how it ends, in a depression and a death spiral, economic death spiral. People just head for the exits. They just leave. They just get out of the economy. That could be 3 months from now. And we never implemented the Paris Climate Accords. We never deliberately did anything to reduce fossil fuel consumption or carbon emissions. And yet, here we are, maybe a few months from doing exactly what we needed to do. But we're doing it on accident. If we had done it deliberately, there could have been government officials teaching us every day what it means, telling us every day what the schedule is. This month we're going to do this. In 100 days we're going to do that. 100 days after this, this is what you're going to see. On 100 days after that, this is going to be your situation. They could have steps for us to go along with. Now, but we didn't do that. We didn't do any planning. We didn't do anything voluntarily. We didn't prepare anybody. We didn't have a plan. We didn't have a scheme. We didn't have an idea. We didn't have a discussion. We never did anything, not a single syllable uttered on the topic of doing something to save ourselves from the end of fossil fuels, which must happen. And since we didn't do anything, now it's going to happen to us, and we're going to be scrambling around trying to figure out our shit on the fly with the house burning down around us. So stand and deliver, I guess. Isn't that what they say? Toughen up, buttercup. It's a coming. The whole get ready for it, whatever it is, whatever it turns out to be. It's going to hit you like a freight train. It's going to hit us all like a freight train, out of the blue or out of the shadows, whichever you prefer. Hit us like a freight train. Hit us like the Black Death. No idea. What was this? What caused this? Why is everything falling apart? Why is my entire life turned upside down? What happened? They had no idea back in 1348. They had no idea. We have no idea now. It's going to hit us. Be there or be square when it happens. Bye.